Hello, I'm John Perry, and welcome to Representative Gary Glenn Reports. And Representative Gary Glenn, it's good to see you.
John, good to see you. I hope you and your family had a good Thanksgiving.
We did. Hope yours did too. Maybe to start off today, we could talk a little bit about your family. In particular, your dad. On December 7th, 1941, as FDR said, a date that will live in infamy. Your dad was, in fact, at Pearl Harbor. To start with today, as we mark the anniversary, tell us about that.
Well, I think it was 74 years ago yesterday, and today, December 8th, when we're taping this, was the day that Congress declared war on Japan. But I had kind of a unique knowledge of Pearl Harbor because my father had been there. He turned 19 in October, and then was standing, prepared to go on guard duty, standing in the formation about 5 minutes till 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday in spit-shine shoes and pressed khakis with a rifle with no bullets. And the first Japanese airplanes flew over. His sergeant had fought the Japanese in China earlier before we were even in the war and recognized them and said, "Hey, leathernecks, it's the Japanese, let's go." And so he was among those Marines who took a pickup truck and ran it through the front door of the armory to break down the door to be able to get in and get ammunition. And as it turns out, John, the last year he was alive, my wife and I took him and my mother back out there the first week of December of 2002. The buildings and the street layouts are the same. And so he was able to identify, and we were able to stand where he remembered standing, shooting at Japanese airplanes. We were out on the Arizona Memorial for the official commemoration service. And we visited his best friend from basic training's grave. He had never been there. One of the things that struck me about this young man's grave, Robert Peake from Oklahoma, who died on the Oklahoma, when I did the quick calculation of the dates, he was to the day 17 and a half years old that morning when he gave his life defending our country. And these days, especially for us, 9/11 is the big day of national trauma. But for my father's generation, what they call the greatest generation, it was December 7th, 1941. We don't give as much attention to it now, but I did have a resolution unanimously passed the House last week recognizing December 7th in Michigan as Pearl Harbor Day and expressing our thanks to all the World War II veterans who served our country and saved, as President Roosevelt said in a fireside chat on the radio, saved our country, our civilization, our religion, is how President Roosevelt put it in that conflict. And I actually met a survivor, Mr. Bloomfield, from Midland, of the Pearl Harbor attack that I did not know lived in Midland because I'm the state chairman of a small nonprofit called Sons and Daughters of Pearl Harbor Survivors, and the Detroit Lions wanted to honor a Pearl Harbor survivor, if they could find one, on a game that was December 7th, 2014, I think. And so I was approached to help find a Pearl Harbor survivor, and I couldn't find one anywhere in Michigan. Closest one I could find was a man in his 90s in Cleveland, and he couldn't make the trip. But now I know Mr. Bloomfield lives right there in Midland, so if the Detroit Lions are still interested, maybe we can get him a neat experience. But anyway, just wanted because in honor of my father, respect for my father and what his generation did, the House of Representatives, I asked them to approve a resolution. They did. And so yesterday was officially recognized as Pearl Harbor Day in the state of Michigan.
And of course, those individuals, like your dad, like those other World War II vets, were so much a part of the fabric of our communities for so many years. They're passing on now, but it's important that we remember them.
It really is. And there's a man who was a fighter pilot during D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge who sits outside the Midland Post Office and sells poppies on Veterans Day, I believe it is, which was a tradition out of World War I. In Flanders fields, the poppies grow. And so I became a member of the American Legion, and so have had a chance to meet and talk with him beyond just our encounters at the post office. I always bought some poppies and took them home to my wife and kids, and relayed to my kids what that was all about. But there are heroes among us. We don't know who they are. And the World War II generation of them are quickly passing away. I think it's 1,000 a day, if I remember correctly. So we need to say thanks to them, but we need to say thanks to everybody, including up to the current generation.
All of our veterans, and
All our
obviously on
veterans.
Veterans Day you did that too.
And it's why I felt so strongly and made a commitment to my local veterans that I would ask, and I was in fact named to the Veterans, Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, which is chaired by, and thank you as well to the current generation, Representative Tom Barrett near Lansing, who is the only member of the legislature who is still currently serving in the military. He's a Michigan National Guard helicopter pilot, but he did a tour in Iraq and also down at Guantanamo Bay. So certainly want to, on this day, every day, but on this day in particular, say thanks to our veterans.
Representative, moving back to Lansing, we actually have a copy of the Midland Daily News here on the table with an interesting statistic.
I wanted to bring and share this headline for those who didn't see it, but I'm not a hide-the-ball kind of guy. I'll tell you where I stand on any issue. And I would tell people I'm a conservative. I believe in limited government, lower taxes, less government spending, and traditional American values. Well, inside Michigan politics graded members of the House of Representatives, and I ended up being the most conservative member currently serving in the Michigan House of Representatives. So I'm proud of that and proud of the recognition. I don't subscribe to inside Michigan politics, so I haven't yet looked at all the votes. They said that I voted liberal 7% of the time. Now, I'm skeptical that I voted liberal on anything, but they said that I voted liberal 7% of the time, which I guess means I voted conservative 93% of the time, and that makes me the most conservative current sitting member of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and having said that, obviously you don't check your ideology at the door, but at the same time, we've talked in the past about how you've met with Representative Santana, a Democrat from Detroit, in your own district. So, yeah, obviously you are open to working with others.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I've had multiple bills that have been sponsored on a bipartisan basis. We just did one this week, which was co-sponsored by the House Minority Leader, Tim Greimel, and by two Democrats who are former firefighters. Our fire chief in Midland, Chris Coughlin, asked me to introduce a bill, and so I got the two former firefighters who are members of the legislature, both Democrats, plus the Democrat minority leader and two Republicans. Could have gotten more if I'd asked, but simply a bill that our local fire department wanted to give them a bigger voice in building construction codes, which I thought was entirely reasonable. The two bills I've had that have already passed the House of Representatives both passed with 105 votes. Now, you know, there's only 110 legislators, so that means I got overwhelming majority of the Republicans and the Democrats on a bipartisan basis. One of those has already been signed into law that reformed the civil asset forfeiture, but I work with Republicans and Democrats alike. The former vice chairman, the Democrat vice chairman of the House Energy Committee, who now works here in Lansing as a lobbyist, introduced me a couple of months ago to an industry group and praised the progress I had made in understanding the energy issue. And I have worked on the energy issue as well with Representative Jeff Irwin. In fact, one of the more liberal news publications here in Lansing had a headline that was headlined Green Tea Party, because for different reasons, different motivations, Representative Irwin, a very liberal Democrat, he would tell you from Ann Arbor, and I co-sponsored legislation that would increase electricity choice. I know we're going to talk about that. But I have found down here when somebody says, well, is so-and-so a conservative? And I say, well, on what issue? Because it's not an across-the-board type of thing. I'm willing to work with anybody of either party based on the principle of an issue, and have had the opportunity to be co-sponsors on any number of bills that are bipartisan in nature.
An issue that you have been talking about this fall that's received national attention is the issue of Syrian refugees. Shortly after the incident in Paris, you sent a letter to the governor that got attention in really a number of quarters.
Well, it did. I actually was flying across the country to visit my son and his family, and was watching television news broadcasts on the internet as we flew, and so heard the first news of the terrorist attacks in Paris. That was on a Friday, and on Saturday I had remembered the governor saying a couple of months ago that he wanted Michigan in particular to be the location where Syrian refugees were brought. And then as I was flying across the country, I saw news coverage of the FBI director saying before Congress that we cannot safely vet Syrian refugees because we have no database against which to compare them. And the chairman of one of the House committees on security, and terrorist activities said the exact same thing. And so I just, when you're a state representative, you got some formal duties. You vote on bills, you introduce bills, but you also have a bully pulpit, which if you're not afraid to use it, you can express an opinion if you believe that represents the opinion of most of your constituents. And I do believe this is the case. And polls have borne this out. In fact, I've seen polls in the 70s, 80s of people who have this concern. So I just put out a public statement that said that I respectfully requested the governor to reverse his call to bring more Syrian refugees to Michigan until the FBI director and other national security officials could validate that we're able to safely vet them and know which ones are in fact refugees and which ones might want to bring the same type of terrorist activity to Michigan that we witnessed in Paris. And I issued that on a Saturday. On Sunday, the governor issued a statement doing exactly that. And then within the week, 30 other governors across the country, Republican and Democrat, followed his lead and said, let's slow down and review the vetting process for refugees from Syria. So this was just an occasion where not only as an individual citizen, a father and a husband who's concerned about our safety, John, this was not the 21st century that we all hoped for or expected. But it is the sad reality that protecting public safety, even in the state of Michigan, even in local governments, is the first and foremost responsibility of government. We shouldn't risk public safety. And so I took the opportunity as a state representative. If a regular citizen might have said it, wouldn't have gotten the attention. I have a title in front of my name, I did. And it resulted in our governor taking what I thought was a very well-reasoned stand, which was then followed by 30 other governors across the country. And frankly, I feel gratified to have been in a position to have contributed to the discussion of that issue.
And as you pointed out, Representative, at the federal level, some of the statements about the degree to which Syrian refugees are being vetted is at variance with other statements by federal officials.
Well, it's true. The FBI director testified before Congress that we cannot safely vet them. And I think some reasonable things could be taken into account. For example, intact families might be given preference. People of a certain age might be given preference. Women might be given preference. We haven't had, to my knowledge, Christian jihadists that have flown planes into the World Trade Center or have waged terrorist attacks in Paris or elsewhere. But there may be some reasonable markers by which we give preference to some refugees over others. But the point is to slow down long enough to give it some thought so that you can do it safely. And until the director of the FBI tells us that we can safely do it, I don't think we should be in a headlong rush to say Michigan wants to be at the front of the line.
Representative, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be back with Representative Gary Glenn Reports right after this. We're back with Representative Gary Glenn Reports. And Representative, a number of times during the course of 2015, we have talked about energy legislation. You're the vice chair of the House Energy Committee. Right now, we're seeing a lot of talk in Lansing about reforming energy policy. Folks are probably seeing a lot of ads on TV about the whole energy issue. Where does it stand right now? Did the committee actually report a bill?
They did, over my objections. But I think by now, John, probably $2 million has been spent on advertising and lobbying and campaign contributions by the two major utilities. And I want to say, as I always do, I don't fault the utilities for looking out for their own financial best interests. It's just that I don't believe their financial best interest is necessarily in the best interests of ratepayers, either residential or commercial or industrial, our major employers. And the reason I asked to be vice chairman of the House Energy Committee is because this is such an important issue for major employers like Dow Chemical and Dow Corning and Midland Cogeneration Venture. And we want to make sure we're able to keep those major employers in Michigan. And I said last year that making Michigan more attractive to new business and industry and the creation of new jobs was going to be my highest priority, and this is it. I would often say we passed a right to work law. We made Michigan a right to work state. We know that attracts new business and industry. What's the next big thing? And I believe it is making sure we have competitive energy rates. We have the highest electricity rates in the Midwest, the 11th highest in the nation. And so we have before us a bill that has now come out of committee And John, I had objections and concerns about the process. We had what Frank Beckman on WJR Radio on his show called a Nancy Pelosi moment on the House Energy Committee when we were presented with a 65-page bill, and then we were presented amendments to it which were multiple pages long, and as soon as we were handed it, the roll call was called. And at one point I said, Mr. Chairman, are we going to have a chance to at least read what we're voting on? And the response was, we'll talk about them after they're passed. Well, that's what Nancy Pelosi said. We got to pass it to find out what's in it. I don't think that's responsible lawmaking. So I objected. The bills did come out of committee. But now that they're out amongst the full legislature, I'm getting a sense that what is prevailing, that we have a shot at actually abiding by what we would typically say as a Republican are free market principles of competition and competitive bidding. You know, the road package that just was passed requires competitive bidding. Why do we competitively bid? Why do we competitively bid building schools or even, private sector construction projects or anything we're going to buy? It's to get the best product at the best price. And if that applies to everything else in life, in our economic activity, it ought to apply as well to the building of new energy producing plants. That's very important to Midland Cogeneration Venture and to Dow Chemical. I am optimistic that we have a shot of getting that put into our energy policy, because right now the utilities decide when a new plant needs to be built. The self-interested party self-assesses the need for new electricity, self-initiates the process, basically has control of the process from beginning to end. I think it's the Public Service Commission that ought to identify when we need new electricity producing plants, and then put it out to competitive bidding and let Midland Cogeneration Venture bid against the utilities, against consumers' energy. And I also believe that our public schools and everybody else that uses electricity choice ought to be able to continue to use electricity choice. You know, because we've talked about it, I think every public school, I think all our state government buildings ought to be able to choose because it saves tax dollars. I think everybody ought to be free to choose their electricity provider. Michigan was free to choose from 2000 to 2008, and it's the only time our electricity rates have been under the national average. They were above the national average before. They've been above it since 2008, when the legislature gave the utilities a 90% monopoly on the market, but reserved 10% for electricity choice. Well, about 40% of our school districts are in that choice market. And in fact, they are in 100 out of the 105 legislative districts. There's at least one school district that is saving money on their electricity bill by being able to choose to buy it from somebody other than Consumers or Detroit Edison. So my two priorities that any legislation will have to win my vote, and I think we've got a shot of making this happen, would be to competitively bid building new electricity plants and protect at least the 10%, those who are on the choice market now. Over the course of my service in the legislature, Lord willing, I'm reelected if I am, I'd like to see that expanded, choice expanded beyond where it is now. But at minimum, I'm going to insist to have my support that we not take it away from people who have it now. And this legislation that came out of committee would, but I think we have a chance of getting it amended. And that may happen even before Christmas. If not, it'll be one of the first things up in 2016.
And along those lines, too, if you talk to observers in Lansing, they're clearly saying that the conversation here is continuing.
It is continuing, and you look at Ohio, which has a totally free and open market. There's no monopoly utilities, and they have 6 power plants being built in Ohio right now, all of them expected to be online by 2019. That's billions of dollars of investment and thousands of jobs created, and that's in a state where there's no monopoly utility, no law that says you get a certain percentage of the marketplace. So in that competitive marketplace, energy providers, including Detroit Edison, are building plants, while in Michigan they argue that they can't build any new plants unless the law gives them a certain guaranteed 90% now, but they're not satisfied with that. They want 99%. I just don't think that's the way we ought to go. It's as simple as freedom of choice, consumer choice, competitive bidding, or monopoly. I think that's about as simple as you can put it, and I favor the free market side of that equation.
Representative, we hear a lot of talk in Lansing at any time, but certainly this December about attracting new businesses, new jobs to Michigan. One of those things that those potential employers look for is affordable energy, is it not?
Oh, there's no question about it. I heard Andrew Liveris give a talk several months ago in which he said it's part of our heritage. So yes, we're going to continue to have a presence in Midland. But if you want to know why we're putting facilities in Houston or Louisiana or Tennessee instead of in Midland give us more competitive energy rates? Well, I'm trying to do that. Rich Wells, the location manager for Dow Chemical, went down and testified here in Lansing in support of the competitive bidding language that I had introduced in front of a Senate panel. And Pete Milojevich of Midland Cogeneration Venture did the same. I've worked closely with them and going to continue to do so. It's such an important issue to make Michigan attractive across the board. We are losing jobs and losing plants that might operate and locate in Michigan because we have the highest electricity rates in the country. And competitive free market states on our border have lower rates, and they're being the beneficiaries of new jobs being created. So it's not rocket, it really isn't rocket science. It's a very complex issue. I've joked that I haven't studied this hard since college. In retrospect, I realize I didn't study this hard in college. But at the end of the day, after 11 months in office now, I realize I think, everything I needed to know when I walked in the door, and that is competition lowers prices and makes them give you the best product or the best price if they want to get your business, as long as we're free to choose. So that's a philosophy that I'm going to continue to promote on this issue and others.
Representative, Planned Parenthood is an issue that folks have been talking about in Michigan nationally to a great degree since the summer. Along those lines, as we sit here today, you actually have a development that you want to talk about.
Yeah, indeed. I was one of the leaders in the effort some 3, 4, I don't know how many, 6 months ago. Time flies in Lansing when you're having fun, I guess. But we actually added to our state budget, 2015-2016 budget, which went into effect October 1st. Not only did we zero out any state funding for Planned Parenthood, which is the biggest provider of abortions in the country. And of course, unless you've been living in a cave, you've heard about these revelations about Planned Parenthood and body parts and being compensated for that and performing abortions in such a way as to preserve the body parts, and then they make money from them. So pretty sordid stuff. Most people are not happy about that when they find out about it. And so we said no state tax money for abortions. And then actually put in the legislation that in addition to that, no state agency that did get any type of funding by the state could secondhand use any of their money and pass it on to Planned Parenthood. So it was brought to our attention that a panel is going to meet next Tuesday that's made up of representatives of the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the state treasurer. These are pretty high profile level folks, and on the agenda is the granting of an additional $1.2 million to the Planned Parenthood operation in Ann Arbor. It's totally discretionary. If they don't spend that money for Planned Parenthood, they can spend it for other state activities, even though it is a mix of federal and state money. And legislation is also being drafted to say that even the federal money that passes through the state budget should instead that does go to Planned Parenthood now, could just as easily and should go instead to our county health departments that can provide all the services that Planned Parenthood claims to provide, but doesn't provide abortions. And it was the conscience of the House to pass this language and say we don't want tax dollars going to pay for abortions by giving it to Planned Parenthood. And so half the Republican caucus today signed a letter with me on my stationery to this State Administrative and Contracts Board, urging them to turn down this $1.2 million increase in a grant to Planned Parenthood in Ann Arbor. So by the time this airs on the Midland Community Television, that meeting will have just happened, like within the last several hours. Don't know what the outcome will be, but half the Republicans, and we just ran out of space on the paper. I think we could have gotten more signatures, but it just reiterated that the conscience of the House is we don't think taxpayers in Michigan ought to be paying for abortions specifically by having money from our tax dollars go to the biggest provider of abortions in the country.
And as was the case with Syrian refugees, maybe another example of your office being something of a bully pulpit.
Well, there's no question it is. And you and I are average citizens, and we have a complaint about an issue or about government, and we voice it. We might get a letter to the editor. But I have the immense privilege, the rare privilege. I'm one of 110 people who have been privileged by, in each case, 90,000 residents to represent their interests in Lansing as a member of the State House of Representatives. Obviously, that does not mean that every vote I cast or every word I say is in agreement with the views of all 90,000 people I am obligated to represent. What I think it does obligate me to do, though, is to make clear where I stand so that people can, in past and future elections, decide whether or not they think where I stand is representative. But I've been privileged, at least for one term, to represent the people of Bay and Midland counties, and I'm not going to be afraid to speak out. I'm not a hide-the-ball kind of guy, and the people will be the final judge. We have a system that allows them on a regular basis every couple of years to be the final judge of whether they think I've done a good job or not, and I'm entirely comfortable with them making that decision. Are there going to be people who disagree with this or that? Of course, but that's part of the job. If you don't have a thick skin, you know, Harry Truman said, if you don't like the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I asked for this job, and I'm happy to do it, doing my best to do the best I can.
Finally, Representative, to wrap up, if people have a question, a comment, call your office, drop you an email, and of course, you're available in the district too.
That's true. We're pretty aggressive about being available. I think I have what we call office hours, which means I will be at the Grace A. Dow Library on, I think, every third Friday or so. But every Friday, I have 2 1-hour periods where I am available somewhere. Jerome Township Hall or Pinconning City Hall. And that's on my website, repgaryglenn.com, R-E-P, garyglenn.com. You can see that schedule. And in most cases, I will be there, and occasionally my staff, former Senator Mike Goshka, will be there if I have a conflict. And then we've also just begun, and last night we had the second of our monthly town hall meetings that we're going to have in the community room of the Grace A. Dow Library, which is downstairs under the auditorium at 6 o'clock, from 6 to 7:30, the first Monday of every month. And in addition to that, if you go to repgaryglenn.com, you're going to find my email, you're going to find my phone number, and we're going to be as responsive as we can be. I have 90,000 people whose interests I'm obligated to try to do the best I can to represent, which means we're going to get back to you as soon as we can. We have a lot of people who contact my office on various issues. We have hundreds of issues and 90,000 people to represent. So if you get voicemail, just know we're busy on the other line helping a fellow citizen. And I hope people will be patient with however long it takes us to get back to them. But we're doing the best we can in good conscience to provide good constituent service as well as represent the values and interests of the people of Bay and Midland County.
Representative, thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, John.
Good to talk to you.
Take care.
And I'm John Perry. Thank you for joining us.